Welcome back to Perspectives on Human Communication. This is an overview of both the cultural studies theory as well as semiotics. I'm wedding these two theories together because they really talk about meaning making in the media and how we use images and the construction of meaning primarily conveyed through the mass media channels, social media, major broadcast networks, streaming networks, and how they craft the culture in our society and really dominate some of the themes in that culture. So let's start with nutshell descriptions of cultural studies, and then we'll get into the semiotics. And we'll try to do this really quickly just so you get the nutshells and the assumptions and have an idea of what these theories are about coming into our class discussion. So cultural studies is most associated with Stuart Hall, and he's pictured on this slide. Hall is his background is described in the book, and so I won't go into that. But let's just say that he was a leading voice in the cultural studies discipline for a long time. Certainly, cultural studies, as he admits and described in his writings, has a lot of different birthplaces, different origin points for this discipline, and its terrain that it studies is vast. But the way he focused in on it was really looking at the meaning-making mechanism of mass media. And as we look at the assumptions under that, you'll see how he approached that and why he says media was so powerful, or in his words, too powerful. So he says that the media, as corporations, we're not thinking about all of necessarily the content out there, but the giant corporations behind media, like Netflix or Facebook. And these corporations represent an ideology, meaning-making systems, and they do it for profit. So that's why they represent a profitable ideology system. And he suggests that they really are at the beck and call of the dominant class in society, the people, the wealthy people, the elite, the folks with the most money that have meanings that they want to convey and that they want others to embrace, because then they'll keep buying their products. That's kind of the nutshell of the logic behind this. So for him, the theory is really trying to unpack, unmask, deconstruct how power operates in those cultural meaning-making systems. So he'll take a cultural symbol and he interprets it, he deconstructs it, which means we dismantle it and look at its pieces and what goes into it, look at what it really means in its component parts, but then when they assemble it and package it and then try to sell it to you in a certain way, it can mean something totally different. And what it does, in effect, is keep you subservient to the dominant ideology. That's the idea behind this theory. So like other theories that we've covered in this book, this theory comes from that critical theory tradition. And so Hall would be classified as a neo-Marxist, a new Marxist, somebody who is looking at the impact of media and how it communicates and uses power in doing that, and then how the way they use their power, they support other institutions. And he suggests that the media really serves dominant institutions like the judicial system and police and schools and mass, big corporate businesses. And so the power of media then simply renews, amplifies, extends an existing predisposition. And that's what creates our dominant culture. So he's not so much saying that the media system is creating culture, they're just reinforcing and perpetuating these cultural icons that serve the purposes of these big industries. So what are the assumptions of cultural studies? Really two assumptions, but they've got corollaries underneath them. So the first assumption is that culture pervades all aspects of your life, that all of human behavior is affected by the culture and the culture meaning-making systems that are in place. And every culture has an ideology wrapped up in it, and not just one ideology that is monolithic, but really a system, an ideological system. So for instance, I put a picture of a flag down there. In U.S. culture, wrapped up inside U.S. culture is not only this spirit of independence and autonomy, that I can do things on my own. I'm an exclusive, an independent person that makes my own choices. But then wrapped up in that is materialism, and those two things go hand in hand, right? Our own Constitution guarantees us the pursuit of life and liberty, but also property. And those things go hand in hand. And so that's part of a cultural ideology that is then perpetuated through the media, mass media, meaning making systems. Certainly, there are differences in those ideological perspectives, and we see that. They're described in the chapter, but they result in what we call culture wars, that you've got people on different sides of an issue, and they're arguing about what the real meaning is. And so, for instance, they reference the 2015 debate over marriage and opening up marriage to same-sex couples and the definition of marriage, and how that's still kind of a touchy, hot-button issue, because there were those that believed that marriage was a covenant within the Judeo-Christian religion that united a man and a woman, a male and a female. And so to co-opt that term and use it for other sorts of couples, there were people who felt very strongly that you just shouldn't or couldn't do that. And so that's an example of a culture war around an ideology that's contained within a culture. And then finally, the corollary that meaning in culture is shaped or perpetuated, in Hall's words, by the media, that the media has a lot of power in doing that. And some people would look to media examples in changing the cultural tide and the ideology of being willing to embrace same-sex marriage. So some people would point to different sitcoms and shows that came on television that sort of led the way in that, and to making that concept more palatable to the U.S. electorate. And then the second assumption is that people are part of hierarchical power structures. And the example there that they give is the idea that you have power being held by strong, powerful social groups. And these could be business groups. These aren't necessarily political groups like Democrats and Republicans, but they are groups that wield power of one sort or another in society. So they could be activist groups. They could be, again, the class groups, the wealthy, the elite, the people that have political and economic influence versus those that don't. And so this assumption says that there's power differential between groups. Obviously, some people have more power than others, and that subordinate groups desire to have power but aren't able to achieve it. And in part, he's saying that the media help keep that system in place, that the media is the ultimate source of power. And because it's kind of like the old expression that the person who wields the pen has the power. The media, the entity that is able to communicate the way life is or the way life should be, has a great deal of power in society. And the example that the book gives on that is our conception in the U.S. of beauty. Like, what is beauty? And you've got people who are seen as attractive, like let's say in Hollywood, it's the Leonardo DiCaprios, the Brad Pitts, the Michael B. Jordans, the Angelina Jolies, the George Clooney's, or the Beyonce Knowles. The people who are seen as attractive and beautiful have a great deal of power. And then those who don't have less power, maybe don't have any power. Okay, so those are the assumptions of cultural studies. So semiotics, the reason I marry these two theories is because semiotics is all about, again, understanding the meaning specifically of imagery. Signs is really what we're going to unpack. So semiotics is a theory that is about how we attach meaning to objects, and specifically create a sign. And we'll talk about what a sign is in class. The chapter talks about that a little bit. So underneath this idea of semiotics, and semiotics, if you remember way back to the early chapters, chapter 2 in our text, critical theory is way over on this end of looking at a way of communicating and saying, hey, something's not right. There's a hierarchy here. There's status quo that we need to be aware of and maybe dismantle or push back against. And then semiotics is way over on the other side of the spectrum. And so they're just looking at the raw facts of meaning making. And they're not going to say one thing is right or wrong about it. They're just saying, this is what it is. This is what's happening. The movement from unpacking an image and understanding how it's evolved and what it means to critiquing it is a very common move that people make, right? So the idea that semiotics can become critical or be used in the critical art is absolutely happens. And the book talks a little, or the chapter that I had you read on that talks a little bit about that. So underlying the semiotic model is how we present things or how we represent things. And Stuart Hall he uses that word, representation, but what he means by that is representation, right? We take an image, a sign, and we modify it, we change it by how we represent it to the public. And so that's going to be a commonality between these two theories, is this whole idea of representation. And then finally, in the nutshell, how something is represented, and then what it represents is they're two sides of the same coin, and that's what's going to create a sign, semiotics. So assumptions behind semiotics. One, we as human beings attribute meaning to objects. And so I put a bunch of different logos from products and companies on here, and you look at these logos, things you're probably very familiar with, but the idea behind that logo, that image, and what it creates in your mind, the familiarity, what it stands for or represents in your mind, that's what we're getting to in terms of semiotics. So what meaning do you attribute, or what flashes into your mind when you see the Coca-Cola logo or that bottle cap there, or the Ford sign, or the Disney logo? Second assumption is that society is really a construction. Our ways of life, our culture is built up upon these ideas and these images, right? We use images to perpetuate and convey and kind of move forward our society, our way of life. And so we perpetuate the signs of that represent the dominant values within our culture. So Coca-Cola, the whole idea of family and friendship, and wait for the Christmas ads to start coming out for Coca-Cola again, right? It's all about connecting with family and how, Santa and cola, and it's all about fellowship with each other. So every business is trying to attach itself to some of those dominant values, and then they're perpetuated by the signs within culture and the media. So then representations of a sign contain layers or generations of meaning, and they build up over time, and they change, and they create what are called connotative meanings or second order meanings. And we're going to unpack a few of those in class and talk about that. So those are the two theories in a quick nutshell and assumptions, and I can't wait to unpack these in class, because these are really useful and meaningful, tongue-in-cheek, theories that help us to understand the mediated universe and the universe of signs that we live in. We'll see you later.